Well, maybe we'll wait a more minute or two, but it's only 7:01.
Hi, Amy. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Paul.
Paul.
Hi, Carol.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? Hi, Elena. Eric, Roberta, James.
Hello there.
Hi, Selena, Amy.
So that's a good family. Sounds like a family call out.
I was going to say it sounded like the end of the Waltons. Good night, John Boy. Good night, Erin.
So I guess whenever you would want to begin, Roberta, it's already after 7.
Then it's showtime. Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Roberta Ellens, the president of the United College Employees of the Fashion Institute of Technology. Our union represents both faculty and staff. We are a wall-to-wall unit. I am personally very excited tonight because growing up, Carol Jenkins was much must-see TV in my house. So whether it was Straight Talk or Positively Black, Carol brought you the stories that other people didn't do. And Carol Jenkins was responsible for many people learning about things that they needed to know about. When FIT became aware of this interview, they reached out to the union right away and said, would it be okay if you tape the interview and so that we could have this in our digital archive? We reached out to Carol and she graciously said yes. So for people who will not be able to see it tonight, it will live on in the FIT library. Okay, now the topic of tonight, now or never, the fight to pass the Equal Rights Amendment is near and dear to my heart. I was a senior in high school when this amendment was passed. I'm going to be having my 50th reunion, my 50th high school reunion next year, and it is incredible and unacceptable to me that the Equal Rights Amendment still has not passed. So I'm really looking forward to that part of the program. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to my very dear colleague, Professor Elena Romero. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta, and thank you to all who are here, and good evening. It is my honor and pleasure this evening to introduce and speak with someone who I have long admired as a young girl, who had not seen her reflection in the English-dominant news broadcasts, but saw some amazing female African-American broadcasters shape and report the news. I must personally thank Carol Jenkins for all that she has done for not only women in the media, but also her activism to promote human rights, women's rights, and of course, equal rights. And tonight, I have the honor of moderating this evening's conversation around Equal Rights Amendment, and we hope to continue throughout the celebration of Women's History Month. Before I begin with my questions, for those of you who may not be familiar with all of Carol's background, I want to read you her bio. Carol Jenkins is president and CEO of the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equity, sister organizations dedicated to the adoption of the Equal Rights Amendment. A board member since its inception in 2014, she joined the leadership team in December of 2018. Previously, Carol was founding president of the Women's Media Center, a national nonprofit organization created to increase coverage and participation of women in the media. As president, she conceived the Progressive Women's Voices program to provide media training for women and girls, and she expanded SheSource, the largest portfolio of women experts in the country. As former chair and current board member of Amref Health Africa USA, an arm of the largest health NGO in Africa, Ms. Jenkins is engaged in efforts to support health programs for African American women and girls. She also serves on the boards of several feminist leadership organizations, as well as groups supporting the arts, excellence in journalism, and international animal rights. Carol Jenkins earned a BA from Boston University and an MA from New York University, my alma mater, and both universities have honored her as a distinguished alumna. She holds honorary doctorates from the College of New Rochelle and Marymount Manhattan College. She was a 2017 recipient of the Sackler First Award, given to women who are pioneers in their fields. And of course, as many of you already know, as a pioneering African-American television reporter, Jenkins was an anchor and correspondent for WNBC TV in New York for nearly 25 years. Early in her career, she co-hosted one of the first daily public affairs programs in New York City, Straight Talk, on WOR-TV, and co-hosted Positively Black on NBC, one of the earliest television programs dedicated to Black issues in the United States. Ms. Jenkins is also an author, the three-time New York Emmy-nominated host of Black America on CUNY TV, the executive producer, writer, documentary correspondent of the award-winning film, a podcast host, and co-anchor of CUNY TV's live election night coverage. Please help me welcome Ms. Carol Jenkins this evening.
Elena, thank you. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Sorry you had to go through that. That's what happens, when you're, getting up in age. And if Roberta remembers Straight Talk, my goodness, that was back in 1970s. So I am thrilled to be here, and Elena, we are colleagues at CUNY TV, your wonderful show, Latinas, and we've done some things together. So I'm thrilled to be in conversation with you here tonight.
Well, I thought since most of the audience is familiar with your television background, I'd kind of step aside a little bit and really focus more on your activism. So with my first question, I thought I'd kind of use one of your own questions I've seen you ask your guests on Black America and ask you to tell us about Black America and your earliest influences.
Right. You're a very clever, reporter there, because I usually say, place yourself in Black America, and we can learn a lot about your experiences and your attitudes. Well, mine is one of those complicated, but not all that unusual stories. My great-grandfather owned one of the largest plantations in Lowndes County, Alabama. My grandfather was one of his favored Black children. And he grew up to marry my grandmother, who also came from an origin similarly, half plantation owner, half Black slave worker, if not in slavery. And so those two people had a plot of land, got married, had and raised 15 children, one of them my mother. And I spent the first part of my life there on that farm in Lowndes County, Alabama. You're talking about, 1940s, 50s, no running water, but a big spirited, loving, productive family. And I had a terrific feminist grandfather, because the reason that we are all my spread out family, doing so well in the world, is that he decided to send all 9 of his daughters to college. We call him the early feminist. The boys stayed home to work the farm. All 9 girls went to college. And because of that, the strength, we were a matrilineal family from that point on. He was the last man who had anything to say in our family. The women did everything from that point on. My mother and her sisters, and all there are 45 of us cousins, a huge family. So he really, set the bar high, put a stake in the ground that, that his daughters were going to have equality. And really, that strain of his belief in girls is perpetuated, our success, and all of the things that I do, come from the fact that that he had the insight. You know, Lowndes County, Alabama, you know, at that time was not exactly, you know, the place where people were talking about equality. But he managed to, you know, to make sure. And that farm of his was the third stop in the Selma to Montgomery march, you know, where they, you know, John Lewis and all spent the third night on our farm. So I always put those two together, you know, the farmer, Billy Gardner, and John Lewis, the congressman, you know, both leaders for civil rights and for equal rights, for women's rights.
I believe you were born in Montgomery, Alabama, correct?
Right, right.
So it's an important place, as many of us know, in the fight for voting rights, with the Alabama State Capitol building having served as the endpoint of the third March for Voting Rights from Selma. But there's so much more to Montgomery's significance than what occurred on the iconic Capitol. I know you came to New York as a very young child, but what can you tell us about the city of your birth and its significance to the civil rights movement?
Well, I think what we learned with the Montgomery bus boycott, you know, which was one of Martin Luther King's early, Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King's early active engagements with discrimination, showed the economic power. It broke the back of the buses in Montgomery, Alabama, and it was a clear call to understanding, you know, how the fight for civil rights had to proceed. And it meant that women, you know, who were working in homes, doing laundry, taking care of children, whatever they may have been doing, had to walk to work, had to walk for miles, and they did it for an unimaginable period of time, broke the back of the busing industry of business in Montgomery, and therefore, you know, were able to do away with the outlandish and what we would say was just scandalous notion that if you were Black, you had to sit in a certain part of the bus, and if a white person got on that bus, you had to stand up. So that we've had terrific stages of progress through the way, but I think Montgomery, you know, was the beginning. It really showed us, you know, what could be done. And of course, Martin Luther King Jr. went on to Birmingham and, you know, throughout the United States and world, indeed, exhibiting the power of equality, of how exactly you got your rights, and it was not easy, and it was not safe, and it was murderous in some instances, but in the end prevailed for the most part.
You authored a book with your daughter, Elizabeth, called Black Titan, A.G. Gaston and the Making of a Black American Millionaire. In fact, Gaston was your uncle. Tell us a little bit about him and his influence in the civil rights movement.
So I described my mother's side of the family, that farm in Lowndes County, Alabama. My grandfather, who was the son of a plantation owner, that whole scene in the South, with a sprinkling of Confederate soldiers too, I might add. My cousin of mine, you know, who is bent on doing the full and total history, you know, keeps finding, you know, these people who are ancestors of ours. And so it's really a remarkable look at how America evolved and how slavery evolved. And my uncle, A.G. Gaston, was the grandson of slaves, born in a little town in Alabama. His mother was a cook, and his mother was a cook for very wealthy Alabama families, you know, very well respected. You know what that was like, you know, if she, you know, the women entertained and they had to, you know, put on feasts. And that was my uncle's mother who did that. She was a famous chef. They would call her a cook. We would call her a chef for very wealthy white families in Alabama. You know, had a very hard scrabble life, even though, you know, he was, his mother did work for these wealthy families. It was the Loveman family that lasted the longest. They were a Jewish family that came to Birmingham, Alabama. The father, sold, cloth from a cart that he pushed, and ultimately developed that into Loveman's department store, one of the biggest department stores in Birmingham, Alabama. My uncle and his mother lived over the horse stall while she cooked for the family. But the one thing that my uncle saw was the benefit of hard work. It really, in his instance, we say it today, if you don't see it, you can't be it. What he saw, was an outsider, coming in and making something of himself and actually becoming a very prosperous businessman owning Loveman's department store. So my uncle began as a child his entrepreneurship, selling buttons, and then working the coal and steel mines in Birmingham. He was in the war, in World War I, went to France, came back, still could not do anything but work the mines, and he began selling insurance to his co-workers, life insurance or burial insurance, as they called it then. And because he was an extremely frugal man, never spent any of his money, he started his insurance business. And then he started lending money to his co-workers at an exorbitant, probably 25 or 50% rate, and gradually grew his businesses. So he became ultimately the owner of 10 major businesses in Birmingham, Alabama, including a bank, the insurance company, a motel, famous for being headquarters for Martin Luther King during desegregation, of that city in 1963. So, that's the story of my uncle, married to one of my mother's sisters, and in fact, my uncle and that aunt raised my mother and one of the younger sisters. After all, there were 15 children, incredibly. So that's my uncle. A.G. Gaston, and just to put a pin on his mark in history, in addition to the motel, he was the one who bailed Martin Luther King out of jail when he was writing the infamous letter from a Birmingham jail. And he did that at the insistence of the president. Martin Luther King Jr. was really not ready to come out of jail. He felt the movement would do better if he stayed in. President Kennedy said, no, there is a danger of a death here, of violence. You need to get him out and get him out now. So that's my uncle. And that motel is now a part of the Birmingham Civil Rights Monument that was created by President Obama just before he left office.
Wow, what rich history. At what point did you realize that you yourself wanted to advocate and fight for human rights, women's rights, and of course, equal rights?
Well, as you pointed out, I was a reporter for a very, very long time. And I was a reporter in the day when you were not allowed to have any opinion or actually do anything about what you discovered. It was like, just tell the story, Carol. That's it. Don't get involved. And I did that for my whole reporting career. And then when I left, I said, well, this is now my opportunity to do something. And so I began picking out nonprofits where I felt that I could be useful. The Women's Media Center was starting up, and that's Gloria Steinem, Jane Fonda, and Robin Morgan. Those three, not too radical, advocates at all. They started the Women's Media Center because they said the reason that women are not in history is that they are not in the daily media. So that's the only way you get in the history books, is if anybody thinks you're important enough to cover you, in the daily press. And so, we wanted to make sure that there was an increase in representation and participation. So we knew that there were far fewer stories about women to indicate that they actually mattered and what they did mattered. And the women and people telling the stories were mostly men, and telling the big stories were mostly men. So that's why we started the Women's Media Center. And like anything else, when you do that and you say, oh, there's tremendous progress, but not enough. What's wrong here? What's wrong there was that our Constitution is faulty. You know, I say these days when we're talking about the root of sexism and racism, I say that you can only look right at the Constitution, the way it was created by slaveholding men who refused to include the enslaved, but also left out their women, not deemed worthy enough to be considered for equality, fundamental constitutional rights in the Constitution. So when I was offered the opportunity to work on this, you know, a small matter, you know, amending the Constitution, I didn't know what I was thinking then. Sure, you know, we'll do this and then we'll go off to our next thing. This will only take, you know, a little time, but we are now almost 100 years working on this amendment that Alice Paul first introduced in 1921. Then the version that we're working on was introduced in Congress in 1923. So, you know, that's my work now. And, you know, of course, I now have enlisted all of my grandchildren and everybody I can get a hold of, you know, to say, do you know that you're not in the Constitution? And this is what you have to do to fix it.
So we know there's no racial justice without gender justice, and no gender justice without racial justice. So as you mentioned, women have played a crucial role in the civil rights movement, resulting in legislation such as Civil Rights Act, voting rights, a win for both African Americans of both genders. Talk to us a little bit about the intersectionality between the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement.
Well, you know, in the civil rights movement, even though there were always women there and always in leadership positions and always doing the strategy, it was only the men who got the credit for that, you know, which, you know, we are now still endlessly trying to make up for, you know, reparations for leaving out the women who were influential in the civil rights movement. But it's, you know, it's all of a piece. And in fact, the very first, what you would call women's movement meeting was held by Black women. And that was in 1852. You know, so the way the women's movement is written is that it took place much later and it was done by white women. And there were no Black women involved in that either. And in fact, it was the meetings that, this is the difference of the meetings that the Black women had. It was for social justice. It was moving the entire people forward. It was not just for women. And that is perhaps why even they were overlooked in the formation and in the history of the women's movement, where people always say, well, there were no Black women there. And they held the very first meeting. And they were there throughout. The Delta sorority, you know, was there throughout. Ida B. Wells and so many others in that original formation of the women's movement were there. So the similar thing is that in both the civil rights movement and the women's movement, the Black women, the women of color, were left out. And reparations, repairing, you know, that invisibility is still, is still going on. So I think that, what we're looking for in this country is the fulfillment of the promise of it. We were all promised equality, democracy, in this republic of ours where everybody would have, the right to vote, the right to economic survival. And we find that in the year 2021, where we still do not have the Equal Rights Amendment, where civil rights, voting rights are in such jeopardy, over 250 bills to repeal voting rights going on now across this country, in a horrific rollback of this concept of we're all entitled to a vote, and this movement to turn that back. And there's also the movement to not give women their equal rights still at the same time. So we have that, conjuncture of repression and suppression of equality. And we have to ask ourselves, who's doing that? Who? And it turns out generally to be the same group of people, because we know that America, from our polling, that America is ready for equality in both, for Black and brown people and for women. all of our polling into 80, 90%. People are ready, but it is the people sitting in our Congress who still have the power to say, who gets equality, who gets a vote or not, who have not caught up to the general, sort of a grand place that the American people have reached.
Now, you're currently with the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equity. Walk us through some of, again, that history leading up to where we are now with the Equal Rights Amendment.
Right. People always ask me, they said, having a sense of how complicated it is, they say, can you just give me the short version of the ERA? And I always say, sadly, there is no short version. Just as we have a century of working on this, and in the 70s, actually passed it. So the thing that people need to understand is that in 1972, Congress actually passed the Equal Rights Amendment by 2/3. That's what the Constitution stipulates, Article 5. You need 2/3 of Congress, and then you need 38 states. So in 1972, we passed it out of Congress, and then it went across the country to get 38 states to ratify it. And by the end of the 7-year time limit, and we'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards, by the time the 7-year time limit had come, we'd only gotten up to 35 states. Now, I think that was a miracle. If we look at our country today, we got 35 states to agree to anything and 2/3 of Congress. But that's what it was in the 70s, where tremendous buy-in, Democrat and Republican, black and white. This country bought into the Equal Rights Amendment then. So we went back to Congress after the 7 years were up and said, we need more time. And we were given 3 more years. And at the end of those 3 more years, still we were stuck at 35 states. So, what was the world like then, for women? I don't know if anybody remembers the pipeline. Perhaps, we all thought, oh, women are in the pipeline. Maybe we don't need the ERA. So much progress is being made. People went off and lived their lives doing other things. Some people still were working actively on the ERA because they understood that we could only get so far until we had constitutional rights. So that in 2017, trying to give you the short version, we were all sitting in our real office then at the ERA Coalition when we heard that the state of Nevada had ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, this Equal Rights Amendment from the 1970s. And we looked at each other and we called our lawyers and we said, does this count? And we were told, yes, it does. It counted. The next year, Illinois did the same thing, and then it took 2 years for Virginia to actually ratify the ERA. But last year in 2020, they ratified the ERA. We had our 38 states. Now, as the Constitution lays out, the requirements are only those 2 things: passage by Congress in 38 states. But because of this wrinkle of the time limit, what used to be called the deadline, but we sort of say, no, that's a little too serious a word. They really didn't mean it that way. It was just a suggestion, because of that time limit, we have been in court, and we are now in Congress trying to get that time limit lifted. Last year, the House of Representatives did it, but because it was not taken up in the Senate, we had to start all over again this year. Last week, the House of Representatives passed it, 222 votes to 204. And now we have to approach the Senate again. And as you know from all of the talk about ending the filibuster and the 60 votes, that's exactly the same scenario that the Equal Rights Amendment is in. If it went regular order, as they call it, we would need 60 votes, meaning, and I would say, we have a better administration now, a pro-ERA president and vice president. We have a new Senate, a 50-50 and pro-ERA. We've got a new Department of Justice, which gets into the court issues that we're in. So all of those things are aligned if we can get the time limit removed, which is always and will always be a stumbling block until we would get that removed. So we're doing a briefing in the Senate tomorrow, the ERA Coalition, explaining to the Senate staff, what the resolution does and what it will mean for the millions of women and in America. So that's our work. And that was the short version.
I saw reported in the news that North Dakota House voted Friday to rescind the state's ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, declaring that it had expired in 1979. What exactly does that mean then?
Well, it's mostly a symbolic thing. It doesn't mean anything because to this point, rescissions have not been possible. That's what our lawyers tell us, that a subsequent body cannot undo what a previous body has done. So, we actually have 5 states that have said we'd like to rescind our approval of the Equal Rights Amendment. But our lawyers are holding fast to say that it's just not possible to do. Of course, there's always a future life in court for the Equal Rights Amendment, probably all the way to the Supreme Court. So this is just, it's a symbolic. What they did was, and we had experts who were guiding them there and trying to bring them away from that decision. But it's a part of the conservative sweep through the country, part of the anti-voting rights, anti-equal rights movement that we're in the midst of. But it's mostly symbolic. It does not, mean the end of the Equal Rights Amendment.
Do you think having a Madam VP, Kamala Harris, helped the cause? Does that help us in any way move this legislation moving forward?
It's, again, if you want to talk about symbols, it's an extraordinary, positive symbol to have a woman vice president. But the truth of the matter is that if she steps out of, her domain, out of the White House and gets on the sidewalk, Kamala Harris has fewer rights than a man riding a bicycle down the street. So yes, having her there and having her solidly in support of the ERA is terrific. But until we actually get fundamental constitutional rights, every woman, and Jackie Spear has said this as recently as last week, we want in the Constitution. We were left out. We have tried every single thing to fix the inequality. How many trillions of dollars and such time and energy that have been spent on diversity, on inclusion, and it doesn't work, and it will not work because the root of the sexism and the racism is in the playbook that we live by, and that's the Constitution.
What can we on this virtual event do to help push the legislation forward?
Well, we need everyone to contact your senators, because that's where we are now in the Senate. We have the entire Democratic caucus signed on to it. We have Lisa Murkowski, who is with Ben Cardin, been a co-sponsor of this bill to remove the time limit. They have worked very, very hard. They've done op-eds together, and they will be at our briefing tomorrow to encourage the Senate staff and the senators to say enough is enough. It is time to give women, equality. And I want to make one point so that everybody understands what this amendment says is that one cannot be discriminated against based on one's sex. And that is all it says. So it's not just women, but it's all LGBTQ. You cannot be discriminated against because of your sex. What it will do is put women in the Constitution, because we are the ones who are discriminated against as well, as LGBTQ communities. But it doesn't say, let's diminish men, let's give women power, that's the only thing it says. So we need you to go to our website at eracoalition.org. There is, a place to get engaged. There's a place to find your senators, a place to write to them to let them know that you support equal rights for women. We just, as a country, since we know that we've got people, the women, the allies, the LGBTQ community, intersectional, we have been doing much more work with the civil rights organizations as well, because we realize that we're all in the same boat now. All of our rights are on the verge of being taken away from us or shut down completely. And, you know, my fear is that if we don't get the ERA this year, we'll never get it. And that's just a shame. You know, I just don't understand why there would be people who want to put women in this constant begging position. Please give us our rights. You know, but until we can, you know, find a way of getting around what is presented to us now, and I know that people are, you know, we need your support. So please.
Carol, help us make sense out of something that doesn't make quite sense. What's the holdup? Why is it taking so long?
Well, there are a lot of opposition. I don't know whether you saw in the paper today that the Supreme Court is going to be taking up the draft, whether or not women should be drafted as well as men. And as we've had these discussions, you know, when the people have said to us, you know, well, you know, if we give you the ERA, you know, you're also going to get the draft. And I said, great. I'll take that trade because women are fighting. They're in combat already anyway, you know, but let's also, while we're doing this, let's think of another thing besides a draft to go to war. What about a draft, you know, to do service in this country? You know, figure out something else to do that everyone can participate in. It doesn't have to be a fighting machine that we're arguing over. So there are people who are afraid that women's protections like that will be taken away. And in fact, I don't know of very many people, you know, who wouldn't take that. Give me fundamental constitutional rights so I can feed my children. I can get equal pay. There is protection against violence. You know, there's rights for women who are pregnant, you know, considerations that can be made if you're pregnant and on a job working, just as they do for men whose backs go out, you know, they make a consideration for that. But in many workplaces, they, you know, refuse to do that for pregnant women. So I think it's, you know, so that in the old days, it was, you would hear things like, well, you know, women are going to lose their alimony, you know, and now we know that in many cases women are paying the alimony. So it's not exactly, you know, the same situation. It's a fear, you know, and for some people, what happens if women actually have free equality? What happens to our, you know, to this, what happens to the cheap labor that corporate America has been using for all these many years to get fat and rich by not paying their women what they pay their men? So those kinds of things that we just have to say, it's not okay. You know, we were just talking in the office, the virtual office the other day about the pink tax, you know, where women still have to pay for menstrual products and hire for dry cleaning. And it's that pink tax that we still assume, many people still assume is okay. You know, women who earn much less should pay more, should have to pay more for these things, you know, than men. And even we as women have to stop and say, no, it's not okay. It is no longer okay. So.
You were talking about fear. You know, try to, I guess, put yourself in the seat of the opposition. What's really at stake from their point of view? What are they afraid to let go?
Well, I think they're afraid to let go of the advantages that this country has had, and many people in this country have had, by suppressing women and suppressing anyone different, you know, whether it's a differently gendered person or differently colored person. You know, this is the history of our country that started off on a very, very bad foot, you know, and it's impossible, you know, to say it doesn't matter anymore because it set the conditions for life, you know, for hundreds of years. You know, what happened to the indigenous populations, what happened to Africans who were brought here in chains, you know, what happened, you know, the scandalous, you know, assaults against women, against, you know, people of color. I mean, so, I mean, I guess I would be afraid too if I knew that I would have to give up persecuting and discriminating against huge chunks of people and that they may, in fact, vote for who they want in office, and that might be I always say, democracy is a really complicated thing. I often have days when, I'm outvoted and I get really annoyed, but that's the system that we bought into, the system that we're supposed to live by. And I guess I would be afraid to. So I do understand the fear. If power, if power has to be shared, instead of weighed by and weighed in a very oppressive way by one segment of the population, by the minority increasingly.
What would the future of women look like if we don't eventually pass the Equal Rights Amendment?
Well, women are, what can I say? The Black women in the election of 2020 who saved our democracy, the Black women of Georgia, who saved our democracy. If you can imagine, where this country would be if we didn't have the strength and the fortitude and the persistence of all women, Black women, women of color, who have been the backbone of this democracy. So I don't think that we will be stopped at all. Of course, we'll persevere. There are so many people who say, well, the language isn't exactly right. Why don't you start over again? You have that time limit. Instead of lifting it, why don't you just start over again? And we say, yes, we have Congresswoman Carol Maloney has crafted a bill that would in fact do that, start over again. But remember, starting over is getting 2/3 of Congress to agree to it and going across the country and getting 38 states to agree to it. So I think that, we're just not in a place where we could achieve that. At least I don't see it in the next 100 years. So we could be a century. But I still, of course, women have always worked hard, and succeeded against all odds. So we're not going to fold up, and hover in a corner and say, "Oh my goodness," we'll just continue fighting, and we'll just continue educating our women and fighting for fairer pay. When you have a country where 1 out of 3 or 4 children are food insecure, they're starving, you've got a bad system. You've got a country that needs help. And one of the things the ERA would do is to give us the right of writing legislation, writing bills, like the bill that just went through that feeds hungry children, so that we can actually, we've too long accepted the notion, oh yes, there are food banks and millions of people have to go to them in order to eat that night. It's accepted as oh yeah, that's just the way it is. To me, that's a scandal, and we have to do whatever we can to make sure that our children are fed, they're housed, and they're educated. That's bottom line, those fundamental things. And that is not happening in this country now.
Is it simply a matter of time, or is that too simple, a simple way of looking at it?
Do you mean it's a matter of time that the ERA will pass, or that women will?
That will get everybody finally on board.
Well, I'm hoping that people will wake up and, as we're saying, hello, people, this is as good as it's going to get, pro-ERA administration, pro-ERA Department of Justice, pro-ERA Senate. That's it. Never has the Equal Rights Amendment in its, recent maneuvering been there. And I don't know that we can count on it staying there. So I would say that if you're interested in equality, now is the time to act. Now is the time to let your representatives know, that if you're their constituents, I want equality, just like, I want what people decided in this rescue plan was, I want to eat. I want my children to go to school. I want, it. So that's where the country has decided they want equality for women. So we just have to do this. But if it's not done, then this possibility will slip through our fingers, and we'll all be looking at each other saying, why didn't we do more?
At this time, I'm going to open up the chat for questions, and I'll let kind of Amy step in.
Okay, we have one question so far.
Yes.
Why is feeding people a quote unquote women's issue?
Because it's not, and I don't want to cast it as a simply woman's issue, but the impoverished of our country are mostly women. That's why, and women trying to feed their children, and even if they are women in with partnered, the women's salary being lower than it should be and not equal affects the entire family. So I think that it's not just a woman's issue, but we have to face the fact that most of the poor, and we know from the pandemic when we see who the essential workers are, working for $7.25 an hour, if they can get that, working 3 or 4 jobs. We know that we lost 1 million more women than men in this pandemic so far. Many of those women who will never go back to work, and those are many of the women who lost their 3 or 4 jobs that they had to feed their children. So it's everyone's job to feed the children, and we just have to get legislation, so that it's possible to do that. Set that as a priority. Come on, we cannot just turn our backs on. And when I was in Houston visiting friends, and I went to the food bank there and worked for an afternoon. You have people showing up in their work uniforms, on a break between, jobs, probably switching into another uniform after picking up essentials for their families that day. Millions of people in that food bank. So I think I want us to look at the Equal Rights Amendment is not some abstract legal thing, but on the ground, feeding children, letting women earn enough to support their families, being protected against sexual aggression. These are all things that would happen under the Equal Rights Amendment.
Kind of playing off that question, can you kind of elaborate in terms of what we should be looking at or thinking about in terms of what would be called women's issues?
Women's issues. Every single issue there is a woman's issue. I'm sure you've heard that, before. International relations. I was just reading about Turkey, which had decided that it's not going to support its equality laws for women because it would upset the way things usually work, where women are the virtual slaves in some instances in that societal makeup. So international relations, belongs to women. So I think economic, I was so happy to see so many of the economic advisors and, high-ranking cabinet members are women. That's a fundamental issue that women have to be engaged in. Taxation. There's a great story in the Times, about housing and how that was the basis of creating the middle class in this country, and the U.S. government did that. But they only gave the housing to whites, and blacks were not allowed to get mortgages and were forced into high-rise rental properties with no tax benefits whatsoever. So now we have a flourishing middle class, generation after generation, where the wealth gap, I think the wealth of a black woman in America might be $5, where a white woman might be, I think at this point, a couple of $100,000. So I think all of those are issues that we need to be concerned about. But there is no issue that women are not affected by, nor should we be engaged in.
Okay, our next question. Who are your women heroes?
My women heroes are there's of course a wide array of political women, you know, who have done fantastic things, but in you know, in our family, it is the women who, as I said, the matrilineal women who raised us all up. You know, we're into the fourth generation from my farmer grandfather, an aunt of mine who took to raising the rest of her siblings because even in those days, it was kind of impossible to really raise 15 children. To actually get them all educated and all. So my Aunt Minnie Gardner Gaston, who is married to my Uncle A.G. Gaston, is my hero, Shiro, because not only did she do it for our family, but because one of the businesses in Alabama was a school. You know, she was one of the ones who went to Washington to plead for the Pell Grants that actually allowed, you know, everybody to go to school, so many more people to go to school. So, you know, I think that, you know, that impact. So it's
Okay.
Minnie Gardner Gaston.
Our next question.
And,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
if you still have Pell Grants, you can thank Minnie Gardner Gaston. Let's hope we could, you know, do away with the debt, though, for sure.
Okay, our next question. Can any arguments influence the religious denominations that teach sexism and misogyny?
I don't know. I think that we've begun to see some high level women leave traditional religious groups that are based on the patriarchal system. I don't know that we can. And we don't like to get mixed up in people's beliefs. You know, everybody's entitled for that. You know, I think we would just want them to understand that, or we would hope that their values in their religious faiths do not conflict with this possibility of giving women equality. But you know, I think that's the tough question, and one of belief, and one that I respect. And you know, I respect that right to have those beliefs. So I'm not sure that how much progress we'll make in that regard, but ever hope.
So there is also a message in the chat box for town hall tomorrow about women work, caregiving, and the ERA and the effects of the pandemic. Okay, let's see, we have some other questions.
Thank you. We hope you'll join us because as we all know, I mean, in my family, you know, I went through raising children and then caregiving for a mother who had Alzheimer's. I had a teenager and an Alzheimer. My daughter was off at college, and for years we lived in this Alzheimer's bubble where my work was affected, my raising of my child was affected. It was, you know, I always say, you know, near devastation for so many families who have that scenario going on. And so we really need to pay attention. We need to get help because it's impossible, you know, in so many situations like that, where you cannot afford to pay someone else to do that caregiving. So I think that we really need to, I know so many women who are still in that situation where they're not only, you know, have their children at home to school, you know, but their parents who are ailing and declining and having to take care of them. So, you know, so many women are in a, you know, just a very difficult place. And we just, you know, have to make sure that caregiving is respected. You know, I think the billions of dollars they put at, you know, what women do to care for their relatives, and that hospitals, you know, and all assume that the families will do this. And so we have much work to do to make sure that there is a, you know, there's help, there's support, and, you know, because we know that the suicides, the depressions, the abuse, all of that during this pandemic have been on the rise. And it's because it's just it's just too much.
Next question. Once again, extremely aggressive tactics to ban abortion are employed. Bills that ban abortion demand doctors to quote unquote reimplant ectopic pregnancies, punish women and doctors under murder statutes are being enacted. What can be done to resist this wave?
I don't know, and we don't have an opinion on on that at the ERA Coalition. So I will pass on that question. Thanks.
Okay, next question. Are there more women than men who are voting against the ERA, or is it evenly split?
We don't know that. Our polling, we don't know that now, but our polling, the last polling we saw was last year's Pew were polling, and we did some polling about 3 or 4 years ago where it was men and women equally, Republican and Democrat equally, young and old equally, in very, very high numbers. So, we believe that we do have men's support. It's not, it's not an anti, because remember, the only thing it says is you cannot be discriminated against based on your sex. So I think that, and we just, interestingly, today, we're just talking with a pollster to go out for us very soon to see where we stand, because as you can imagine, we've been through a very tumultuous time. So what may have been true in 2020 is no longer true. So we're in the process of getting new numbers for that.
Okay, thank you. Oh, next question. What should history teachers and professors teach about the history of the campaign for the ERA?
Well, I think that you should teach the inclusionary nature of it, that there were always Black women. And in fact, the very first polling, speaking of the polling in the 70s, the earliest polling, Black women supported the Equal Rights Amendment at a higher rate than white women did. And so that there was always this support, involvement, engagement. We would not be here today. In terms of recent history, you should teach. In Nevada in 2017, it was a Black woman legislator, Pat Spearman, a state senator, who led the ratification of the ERA in Nevada. In Illinois, it was Juliana Stratton, very powerful Black woman who is now lieutenant governor of Illinois, who was engaged there. And in Virginia, 2 Black women who carried the Equal Rights Amendment in both the House of Delegates and the Senate, who passed successfully, getting the equal rights and getting us our 38th state that we needed, were two Black women. And so interesting that both of them are now running for governor of Virginia. So it's the ERA work, I'm telling you, that makes you very powerful. And the third woman who was very engaged in that effort in Virginia is running for lieutenant governor. So, and is a Black woman. So incredible. And so I would say, as you look at the movement, to look at who was engaged in it, and the fact that there are many people of many persuasions who were, who did a lot of the work, and it was not just a white women's movement. It was everyone who got it, who understood that our Constitution did not reflect us.
Okay, we have a follow-up question to the earlier question regarding women and then how the split is going. And I say, therefore, a large number of women are voting against their own interests. Why is that?
It's because they don't see it as voting against their own interest. In the debate in the House last week, almost all of the opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment was done by women of the Republican Party. So I think, we've seen this, that, there are many things in play. And I think, it's this idea when someone else asks the question about what they're afraid of. And I think that there is that fear there for people, and many women who oppose it as well, that they will lose the power that they've had, and they, in many instances, vote as their husbands do. So I think that, you know, I get it, you know, I understand it. So, but they don't see it as voting against their interests. They see it as defending their family values in some cases. I can't speak for all, you know, but in some cases.
I've got a question. How can we promote the Equal Rights Amendment as one that includes all communities? I think certain populations may see it leaning in one direction more than another. What can be done to kind of market that message of inclusivity?
Right. Well, I think it's, the word is beginning to get out. The more we say, you know, people, the only reason that we're here today is because they're Black legislator women who did this in the last 3 states that got us close to the 38 states, you know, is to tell that story and to tell, you know, of the people who signed on to our letters to the president and letters to the House and letters to the Senate. There'll be another one, and we hope you all will sign on to that, or across the board. Voto Latino, who's always with us, and many, you know, Latino and Asian organizations and LGBTQ organizations. I mean, it is the understanding that we are all together and our rights are under extreme pressure. They're extremely vulnerable in every single way. And so we really have to move together and, you know, reflect, you know, that engagement in all people who get it. It's not just women, it's women and men who want it. It's not just white women, it's not just Black women. It's, you know, we are all in this together. And I think that the strength is in our power in working together.
Great. Again, you know, place your questions in the chat bubble and we'll be able to ask them to Carol. We still have a little bit of time left. So we still have a little bit of time. Use your time wisely, put in your questions and we'll be able to answer them.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. You know, it's, you know, and don't forget our website, eracoalition.org. We're in the Senate tomorrow. Everyone is invited to come to that briefing. It's at 4 o'clock. I think Vivian had it in the chat. You know, that's our first step. And then the next step is another petition, you know, sign on. You know, we're still working to get those 8 senators. If we have Murkowski and Collins signed on, that's 52 votes. So that should there not be, if there's some way that the filibuster is removed, you know, then we have our votes. We get the Equal Rights Amendment. You know, if there's some way of maneuvering through that system without requiring 60 votes, we have the votes required to do that. But so far we don't have 60 yet. That's why we need your help to convince your senators to do the right thing.
Can you mention who hasn't been on board yet, just for those who are kind of keeping tally? Who would we need on board? Who's left? You know, what representative states are we talking about that we could really try to get some push behind?
Right. Well, what we will do is, I hate to, you know, to single them out, but we're looking for the most. There are many that we know that are not candidates for, you know, for signing on, but there are a few, like Mitt Romney. We would hope that he would come through. Toomey, Tillis, you know, perhaps Loomis, you know. So we can send you, if you go to our website, we've got the full list there that you can search and send your thoughts on needing to support the Equal Rights Amendment, but it's eracoalition.org. There's a share kit that we have for social media that you can use. But you know, we're looking for the, you know, the moderate middle, and there's not a lot of that left there, but we're ever hopeful.
Okay, we've got one more question. Have you worked with our national unions the AFT, and the NEA to assist with mobilizing our members to support these efforts?
We do have unions that have signed on to our, and we would love to discuss this afterwards, because we have, you would be tremendously helpful, in that. So the answer is yes, we would love to work in a very aggressive way, but we've had, I don't know, maybe 10 or so, the flight attendants, the, unions who are joining us, joining our work as well. If you go to our website, you will see them all listed, our members, as well as those who've signed on to our petition to the White House and to the House.
Okay. Can you tell us more about moments in your career that the ERA would have been useful to you if it had already been passed?
Yes, I think that I would have earned more money. I would have had more opportunity. I would have gotten better stories about, I would have had a better career. I would have had, well, I had a long career. You can't ask for more than 25 years, but I could, that was a long career. But I think that, we still see, some of the men that I anchored with, and some who are still anchoring, with younger and younger partners. That is generally still not afforded, women in the news business. I had the great honor of being selected by our female news director to go to South Africa to cover the release of Nelson Mandela. If she had not been in that position, I would not have had that opportunity. And we all understood that, it was, as you know, such a male-dominated world, and a really true pecking order of people who had been in positions of covering politics and whatever. You just, didn't get to cover those stories because no matter what you did and how old you got, you were always junior, to the senior veterans. So, had there been an equal rights amendment, I would have had a better career. I would have been paid more. And my friends, I cannot say that personally I was subjected to sexual assault or aggression, but so many of my colleagues were in the newsroom by news directors through the years. And that would have been stopped. And as you know, one of the, some of the energy, the fueling the equal rights movement now is the Me Too movement, which continues to reveal aggressions that I think that once we have the Equal Rights Amendment and there is recourse for bad actors, that I think you will see lives changing for women. Our daughters and our granddaughters are not having that much of a better work life, subjected to advances, low pay and all. I mean, this is continued. We're into multi-generational of young women still having to fight the same battles that we fought and thought we were winning and making advances. And we see, that, we really need the Equal Rights Amendment to put a stop to it. So there is some, I don't want to say punishment, but I do want to say recourse and increased fundamental rights. But I don't think I wanted more than 25 years, which is, but a better pay scale would have been great. All of the women, by the way, always earned in my time less than the men. Elena, I don't know whether that's changed, but.
It might be a little bit better, but we've still got a way to go.
Right.
Do you think part of that fear, again, I'm just thinking of the opposition, is the potential recourse? We're now living in a woke nation. We're in our kind of second civil rights movement. Are men in fear of what could happen if now this is officially on the books? Seeing what we've already been documenting as the changes that are happening in various industries.
Right. Well, yes, there may be, yes, and there in some instances should be, you know. I think women are always so, you know, concerned. They don't want to hurt anyone's feeling. If in fact corporate America, the federal government, because the ERA's first blush effect is in the federal government and in state governments, you know, and what will happen is that everything has to be evaluated. One of our partners in Arizona did a survey of the statutes in the state of Arizona that would have to be changed if we have an ERA, and it includes everything from pronouns to just laws that treat women more poorly than men. And that report is 650 pages long. You know, so you know, there will be, yes, once there is an adjustment, there will be pain. So I can't say that there won't be, but I think that if we do this together in the most optimistic and thoughtful way, you know, we can do it so, you know, so that we all win. You know, this is not a case where, you know, where men have to lose if women have power. You know, it's that we all have power. You know, that's the difference. I think there's a power sharing element since men have been in control for so long. And so absolutely, you know, that there's only, I think, one CEO in a Fortune 100 company, you know, one. And interestingly, NASDAQ has a proposal that would say that if you want to be listed on NASDAQ, then you have to have at least one woman member of your board and another diversity person in the company, some arrangement like that. And some number like 80% of the companies do not have a woman on their board, you know, a very high number. So we're looking at, you know, so that you know, that's a good thing. You know, that's not a bad thing. Putting a woman on the board doesn't mean that you have to have fewer board members or fewer men. You just add the women. You know, why don't we do it that way? Just add the women. It's Jackie Spear, the congresswoman who, you know, is the sponsor of the House resolution, you know, said women want in. We want in this Constitution, you know, but let's grow our nation. Let's grow possibilities. So it's not a question that if you add a woman, a man has to go. You know, it's like we're there together and we make our country bigger and better. We have women who are able to function, you know, in leadership roles, and can succeed. So, you know, I think that that's possible, rather than thinking that, oh, we're going to, you know, usher all the men out of the door if we allow women in, is not the case. It's not the way this should work. It's not the way it has to work at all.
Again, we have a few more minutes, so if you've got any final questions, please place them in the chat. And we have quite a number of men in the audience. We'd love to hear from you. Please ask some questions and give us your feedback.
We love you, men, you know. Thank you for being here. We adore you. This is not.
I asked the questions, but it didn't get answered. It didn't get
I
asked.
apologize.
Can I ask it here? Hi, Carol.
Hi.
I was wondering, so women still have a large economic buying power, and there are lots of companies that support the senators that are against the bill, and we've had a history of boycotts in this country. Is there any movement to boycott the companies that support the senators that are against the bill?
There is, in its inception, yes. You know, this is where we're moving now, and we are taking the lead from. This is actually where the civil rights, the voting rights situation is now in Atlanta, in Georgia, where the people who fought for all people to be able to vote are now turning their attention to the companies. Atlanta is a very rich place for companies to be. It's a very good positioning place. And so they are saying, hey, Coca-Cola, what's going on? You know, hey, Delta, you know, why aren't you why aren't you weighing in on the voting rights? You know, and I think that, you know, we absolutely will be joining in that campaign, you know, of saying, you know, hey, you know, we need to, you know, to move ahead here, and we need your support. We have just begun our corporate roundtable, and you know, we are beginning to add companies. We have Diageo, a company that's just joined us, and we are beginning to reach out now to many in corporate America, the biggest corporations, who actually all buy into this idea of equality. And so I think you will see some of that happening with our corporate roundtable. It's a commitment to support constitutional equality. And, you know, we are finding a favorable response. So that's a, come join us in our work. We haven't quite gotten to the point of saying, hey, you bad guys. And I don't think we will get there as long as we continue to have the support of companies coming in to help us do our work by supporting us financially in a very big way and moving forward. So we are beginning to make steps in that direction.
You have another question? Once the ERA is passed, what identity group should be next on the list for a constitutional amendment to guarantee civil rights?
I love that question. I love it because for many years, the ERA coalition supported something that we called ACE, which was an inclusive equal rights amendment. And so one of the things that might happen is that the next amendment that comes along will be an expansive, inclusive, however you want to define it. So it's not just sex. You know, we are supporting this amendment to its conclusion, and only when told that there are no other options will we give it up. But should we start over again, there would be no reason to just do sex, you know, because so many other people are left out. We would include, as we did in our amendment called ACE, Amendment for Constitutional Equality. It was race, it was disability, it was faith, it was gender. It was all of those things that would explicitly include in an amendment constitutional fundamental equality. So that when we think about starting over again, we would start over again that way. You know, we were working on that for a couple of years until suddenly, you know, the 3 states ratified the old, as we used to call it, the old ERA. And then now we're in this full flush saying, we have an opportunity to get this, you know, done. Let us finish it. And hoping that we can get rid of the time limit. We're told that Alice Paul, when she heard that it was being voted on, and it was a big success, everybody was voting, but then they introduced this time limit, you know, she cried because she knew that it would forever in the future, we hope not forever, but for almost a century in the future, make it a stumbling block for women's equality. So, but I think, yes, we need all of those things. And in fact, we were working on a New York State amendment, and New York doesn't have an equal rights amendment. Many states do. And we were working with the Assembly and the Senate for a couple of years now, several years, on getting that expanded amendment in place. Because again, you know, while there is a possibility of doing the sex only amendment, we are so far along in understanding who else was left out of the Constitution, you know, that we might as well include everybody. So, you know, we continue to work on that in New York State. And then once we're finished with, you know, this amendment, then we'll go back to our inclusive, expansive amendment and start working on that. But the implementation of this ERA is going to take, as you can imagine, we already have a 5 to 10 year plan on what happens next, that evaluation of every statute in the federal government, states governments, and how we work in a very intersectional way to make progress. How do we evaluate it? Is there transparency, in what people are paid? How do we, so there's still a lot of pieces that have to be thought through to actually get to the point of, of full-blown equality. And that's probably at least 10 years out. We've been doing this way for hundreds of years. So I don't think it's going to be resolved in a matter of a year or two. So there is continued work to be done to putting it all in place. But great fun, to figure that out. A long answer to a question about yes, but so the answer is yes. There are all of the other people who are left out of the Constitution. In fact, last year I was teaching a class at Hunter, and we're doing it again this year. It's called Campus ERA Day, and connected to that, Grow Fellows there, and we have a virtual. And it used to be unique then, a virtual Zoom meeting of campuses across the country. We thought we were so, technologically advanced. Everybody Zooms now, of course. But the students, as we were describing what the Constitution is and going through it step by step, what it says, we had many students in our classes who said, this doesn't work. We need to scrap it and start over again. So I think as we begin to, to look at our Constitution, I think they did a brilliant job perhaps for the time, and they gave a way to fix it in years to come. And that's the amendment process. And we need to use that as long as we can to make sure that everyone is included and that it works. And it's not working if people can't vote. It's not working if people can't eat. It's not working if there is the extent of poverty and dismay in the richest country in the world, if we can't figure out how to get that done, and if there isn't, equal participation of everyone, no matter what their sex.
We'll have time for about 2 more questions before our event concludes. While people are thinking of their questions, I have a question for you. What kind of message could we send to young women, little girls like my daughters and your granddaughters, as they're watching all of this?
Right. Well, I think, and our sons too. My daughter said, we have twins, 8-year-old twins, girl-boy twins, and the 12-year-old, soon to be 12-year-old, and my daughter was looking at her son, and he was like lost in thought, and she said, Sam, what are you thinking about? And Sam said, I was thinking about Shirley Chisholm. She says, do you know that she ran for president of the United States? So these are our boys, who need to understand that as well. I think I am very encouraged by what I see is happening in the lower grades now, from kindergarten, second grade, third. They're studying women and men. They're studying people of all races. The boys are beginning to question, can I do that as well? That's always a sign of, of progress, and we assure them, yes, of course, you can be vice president. Yes, so I think we need to think of all of our children, the girls and the boys, growing up to understand that sense of, we all belong and we're all equal and we can all be president of the student council. We went through so many, still, I hear girls, who are afraid to run for, president of their student council. And so until we work on that, and I will say, this, we've been through so much, the George Floyd murder, all of the marching and all of that. And we all know about the boys' talk. This is the talk that we have to give to our sons, when they're encountered, when they are encountered by the police. But one of the things we don't pay enough attention to is what our girls of color are taught and what they absorb from our society. And nobody talks about the talk that we give to our Black girls, our daughters and our granddaughters, to say, this country does not love you. You are going to encounter people who will not like you because of the way you look and because of the neighborhood you live in. And so you have to be careful, because people will think, that you don't deserve to be treated as a child. Security guards will put handcuffs on you and drag you out to a police car. So I think that that's one of the things that we need to be extremely careful of what is happening to all of our girls, but our girls of color who are also subjected to the same kind of discrimination and brutality in classrooms. The studies in New York City, the New York City police who, will have handcuffed and jailed, Black girls, at a much higher rate, than white girls. So it's that Black girls are assumed to be adults as opposed to children, and therefore can be treated in a bad way. I'm making a wide assumption, and I don't mean to do that. I just mean to say that there is the talk that girls of color are given to stay alive and to protect themselves, in this country, and we have to be aware. We have to be aware of that. They're endangered. The suicides are going up, and we have an at-risk population. Many nonprofits that are now raising billions of dollars to try to address this problem, and I think that that's one of the things we need to be aware of. And we went through a phase, I think, where girls thought, I'm not discriminated against, there's no problem here. I hear less and less of that now, that they are encountering discrimination, and so they know that it's because they're a girl or a woman. And so we're evolving in our sense of understanding what it is when we're feeling that something is amiss here, and that something being amiss is that you are getting short shrift because you're a woman or a girl, and that needs to be addressed.
Carol, our country is starting to have honest conversations. Are we actually at a point where we're really ready for change?
No, I'm not so sure. No, I think we're a totally fractured country. I think we've broken in half. And I think that what's at stake now is, what's the future of our country? I'm not so sure that, certainly some few people can talk and negotiate, but I think I'm of the opinion that we have broken apart. And it's like, I don't know, the Civil War. It could become that. So I think that we need to reconcile ourselves to something like that. Hopefully we can, better minds and more conciliatory minds will come into play, but I don't see it. I see a firm break in our society. And I think what happens to the country is up for grabs. It's up for, who wins this battle. So I'm hoping it's those who believe in equality and justice and the law. But I'm not so sure.
Well, on that note, that concludes this evening's program. I want to thank you, Carol Jenkins, for being here with us tonight, the UCE of FIT, the UCE of FIT's Women's Committee for this important event as we close our celebration for Women's History Month. I hope everyone has enjoyed the program and the insightful conversation. I'm Elena Romero, and I wish everyone a great night. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you,
Thank
Elena.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elena and Carol.
But be ever hopeful.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.